Let's talk about lift and thrust in hovering flight. In hovering flight, the goal is to keep the helicopter stationary relative to the ground. This requires a delicate balance of forces, particularly in lift and thrust. Lift is defined as the upward force generated by the rotor blades as they spin, creating a pressure difference between the upper and lower surfaces of the blades. In hovering, lift must exactly equal the weight of the helicopter to keep it in a stable hover. As the rotor blades rotate, they move air downward, creating a downwash, which in turn generates an upward lift force. The amount of lift depends on factors like the blade pitch, controlled by the collective, and the rotor RPM. Thrust, in the context of hovering, is the force produced by the main rotor blades that acts in direction perpendicular to the rotor disc. In hovering, thrust is what actually supports the helicopter in the air. In a hover, lift and thrust are essentially the same force in different contexts. In a perfect hover, the resultant force is vertical and equal to the helicopter's weight. This means that there is no net movement and the helicopter stays in one place. Any imbalance causes the helicopter to rise or descend. Collective controls the pitch of all rotor blades equally, changing the amount of lift/thrust generated. While raising the collective increases lift, lowering the collective decreases it. The cyclic tilts the rotor disc in a particular direction, which changes the direction of the thrust. If the cyclic is perfectly centered, the thrust remains vertical. If tilted, it introduces a horizontal component, causing the helicopter to move forward. There are some environmental factors to consider, like wind. Even a slight breeze can affect the balance of forces during a hover, requiring constant adjustments by the pilot. There's also ground effect. When hovering close to the ground, within one helicopter blade diameter, the helicopter experiences an increase in lift due to the interaction of the rotor downwash with the ground. This effect diminishes as the helicopter gains altitude, requiring more power to maintain an out-of-ground effect hover. In hovering flight, lift and thrust must work together in a single resultant force that must exactly balance the weight and drag of the helicopter to maintain a stationary position. Let's talk about weight and drag during hovering flight. Weight is the force of gravity acting on the helicopter, pulling it directly downwards towards the earth. It is a constant force equal to the mass of the helicopter times the acceleration due to gravity. For the helicopter to hover, the upward lift generated by the rotor system must exactly counteract the weight. If lift is greater than weight, then the helicopter ascends. If it's less, then it descends. Drag is the resistance force that opposes helicopter motion through the air. Even in a hover, the helicopter experiences drag. Let's talk about types of drag in a hover. We have induced drag, the drag associated with generating lift. In hovering, induced drag is significant because the rotor system must produce lift continuously. There's also profile drag, the resistance due to the shape of the rotor blades themselves as they cut through the air. Parasite drag is the drag caused by non-lifting components, like the fuselage, the landing gear, and other protrusions. This drag is minimal in a stationary hover, but increases with airspeed. Now let's talk about pilot inputs. The collective adjusts the lift to match the helicopter's weight, allowing the helicopter to remain at a constant altitude. The cyclic helps to maintain the horizontal thrust to ensure the helicopter doesn't drift due to unbalanced drag forces. In hovering flight, weight acts downward and drag opposite to motion. For the helicopter to hover, lift must equal weight and the thrust counteract the drag. The balance of these forces results in a stationary position, both vertically and horizontally. Maintaining this balance through precise control inputs and power management is key to achieving and maintaining a stable hover. The pilot controls this balance through precise inputs on the collective and cyclic, constantly adjusting to maintain a stable hover. Mastering hovering is all about understanding and managing these forces to keep the helicopter perfectly balanced in the air. Be sure to like and subscribe this video. If you want to learn more about helicopters, I have a free course on getting started with helicopters. I also have a course on how to pay for flight school, and I also have a course on getting your private helicopter license. I'd love to help you out. Links are all down in the description below.